It is my pleasure to introduce Waterloo's new Associate Provost, Co-operative and Experiential Education, and my new boss, Dr. Norah McRae. Norah is known nationally and internationally as a leader in cooperative and experiential education. Her involvement in co-op education, work-integrated learning, and community engagement spans more than 20 years, over which time she has led strategic program development and research on student engagement, work-integrated learning, and intercultural competency development. Norah has been published in the International Handbook for Cooperative and Work-Integrated Education, the International Journal of Work-Integrated Learning, Cooperative Education and Internship Association's Journal, and The World is My Classroom, International Learning, and Canadian Higher Education. In 2017, the World Association for Cooperative Education awarded Norah the Donald MacLaren Jr. Academic Award for Professional Achievement in Cooperative and Work-Integrated Education. Today, Norah will be presenting on key quality attributes for experiential learning from the institutional perspective. She will also be presenting a draft quality framework for work-integrated learning programs. Please join me in welcoming Norah.
Well, good morning, everyone. And it's such a pleasure to be here and to have such a great crowd. Congratulations to the team on pulling this symposium together. It's just going to be a fantastic day, and I imagine you can't be more proud of the work you've done, and what a great example of the work that everyone has contributed to. So it's a pleasure to be here and to provide my brief comments to kick off the day. Hopefully something of what I say will be helpful, and I hope that it will start a robust conversation so that we all continue to learn and grow in this space, and that Waterloo continues to show such terrific leadership, which it clearly already does. I will see how this works. Okay, I'm going to present this concept that I call the P.E.A.R, P-E.A.R, and I'm going to be talking today about this construct from the perspective of what it means for an institution to be taking on experiential learning broadly, so system-wide. So I'm going to be looking at this from the pedagogical considerations, experience, assessment, and reflection. But I want you to think of it from the lens of an institution or program level, higher level. But then I'll also show you how we use the P.E.A.R to look at specific quality indicators for experiences themselves. So we'll go through all of that, and there are some handouts on your table that you can reference later. Okay, so this is the P.E.A.R. I like to come up with things that are easy to remember. I don't know about you, but I find that, and then just beat them to death, you know. So we'll work on that today. Okay, so pedagogy. The first bit is when we think about experiential learning, as you well know, it's first and foremost pedagogical event, exercise. It's something about enhancing the educational experience, as you know, right? Lots of theory around why we do experiential learning. And from an institutional perspective, of course, the first step really is how does it fit within the overall curriculum? What's being done in terms of curricular mapping before, during, and after each of these experiences to allow them to sit within the curriculum, allow them to enhance the learning through these different modes that is already happening in the curriculum and with classroom-based experiences and the content being delivered through the classroom. This is slightly awkward, I must say, so I'm going to stand over here. Okay, so are these experiential learning events intentionally mapped out throughout the curriculum? That would be the first question. Or are they something that's really interesting happening within a course? And that's good, it's interesting and it's happening within a course. But really institutionally, the impact is much stronger if it's, of course, part of a full-on curricular approach, first, second, third, fourth year, etc. All right. The second thing are around the learning outcomes. Have the learning outcomes been identified through the experiential learning event, and how do they map onto program level learning outcomes, institution-wide learning outcomes, or other learning outcomes that you might be thinking of? And in the case of experiential learning that aligns with getting our students future ready, how do they align with some of these future ready skills that we want to be thinking about preparing our graduates for? Do the experiences help them create analytical thinking and innovation, complex problem solving? All of those things that seem to be top of mind for what the learning that we want our students to have now, and then what seems to be trending into the future, according to the World Economic Forum. So that would be a higher level consideration as well. Because if the curriculum overall is trying to reach some of these goals, then some of that will be happening in the classroom, in content, traditional classroom experiences, and some of this might be attained through the experiential learning components that you're building into the curriculum. And how do they map together and how do they fit together broadly? Okay. The other piece around pedagogy is what is going on in the curriculum that actually intentionally connects the theory to the practice. So that's a question when you're thinking about the experiential learning that you're bringing in. So again, it's not just about engaging the students and having them have a robust experience, but it's really about that intentional curricular connection. And then, and this is the tricky one, how I find it tricky, and I hope that you all have solutions to this, because I think this is something that hasn't been tackled necessarily very well, is how does the learning post that experience become reintegrated back into the curriculum? What's happening after that experience when the student comes back into the classroom, comes back into their following year, whatever they happen to be doing, so that we're building on that learning and it continues to refresh not only our curriculum, but also what the student's academic program is all about and how does that stitch together. And I find, having been in this space for a long time, that what can happen is that we have these experiences that occur over here and they're set up nicely and the students go off and do them, but really that thoughtful post-experience integration piece and really building on that and allowing that to help us be a better learning organization doesn't happen necessarily as well as it could. So that would be a challenge I'd throw out there for all of the experts in the room here. How might we tackle that more intentionally? And when I think specifically of one model of experiential, the co-op model, this is something that doesn't happen very well, I would suggest. Okay, so that's pedagogy, the P at the institutional level. All right, now let's get into the E, the experience. And I'm not gonna touch on this very quick, very long, but to point out, the main point of this is to point out that, and this comes from a work by Tara Fenwick. I don't know if you're familiar with Tara Fenwick, but she wrote a really great paper about that classified the various forms of experiential learning into these big categories, and that they can come from a range of different perspectives, and have a range of different philosophical underpinnings that then guide what happens and why it happens and what you're assessing and why you're assessing and all of the other bits that flow from it. So I just wanted to pause and talk about these 5 big categories just briefly as we think about what we're doing and why we're doing it and where it's coming from. So there's a constructivist, which I think we're familiar with. This is, for example, very much where programs like Co-op are rooted. Critical cultural perspective, so a lot of the intention around critical cultural experiences are ones that expose students to questions of power and control and liberation theology, all that stuff that Freire came up with way back. So we're familiar with some of the reasons why an experience might be rooted in that basis. Psychoanalytical, this is a perspective where the idea or the intention behind the experience is to really push the student or the learner at the edge of their comfort zone. So this would be, a classic example would be Outward Bound, for example. An experience, students are out there, I don't know, running across treetops or something, and it's really scary, and they're having to really dig deep as they master that experience or have that experience. They may not master it. And that's the psychoanalytical perspective. It's really pushing that boundary and really getting to some of that deep learning that happens that way. The situative experiences comes from Lavey and Wenger's work. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. That's the communities of practice, legitimate peripheral participation. This is where you have students or learners engaged initially in the periphery of a community, and as they have more experiences, they become closer and closer to the center of that community and become adopted as one of the members of the community. And part of the rationale behind these experiences is really about having students exposed to those communities, develop that professional identity, and be able to, when they graduate, be able to transition very easily into that community is one of the outcomes. And the final perspective is an activist perspective, and this is one of very much a co-creation perspective, that the learner is part of an environment and is influencing that environment as much as the environment is influencing them. So if we look at this very simple 2x2, you can sort of see how these different perspectives map out. The constructivist and critical cultural perspective are very much one that sees these experiences as predominantly rational. Psychoanalytical, situative, and activist see these experiences as more whole body. And on the left-hand side, constructivist and psychoanalyst very much as an individual learning pursuit, and on the other side of the axis is one that really does engage more of a external perspective as well as the internal perspective in the learning, okay? So that's all I'm really going to talk about with this, but the main point here is this is why I believe experiential learning in all of its forms can come from any discipline, because it can come from a range of different objectives and philosophical stances, which can be very comfortable in some disciplines versus other disciplines, and that's where I think we can all find our place in this. But it's important, I think, to be thinking about that. Okay, now this is where we use the P.E.A.R again, and you'll see this handout on your table. This is a way of thinking about each experience individually and the components that should be in play with each experience. Again, the pedagogy, are the learning outcomes articulated, all that kind of thing, how is it connected, the experience, it's hands-on, it's meaningful, it's substantial, the assessment aligns with the curriculum, and there is meaningful and mediated reflection. So those three components, regardless of what you have as an experience, should be there for quality. So this is the second level of how we use the P.E.A.R. Are you with me so far? Yep? Okay, good. This is on the reverse side of your handout, because one of the key issues we find in this space, as you well know, is what are we talking about? Someone might call something an internship, someone might call something a service learning, someone might call something something else, a field school or a field experience. So there's been quite a bit of work, as you know, in this space, trying to come up with some common terminology so that when we're talking about these experiences, we can have a common lexicon, if nothing else. So this handout shows the work that's been done to date. In the yellow, that is what the National Association, the Cooperative Education and Work Integrated Learning Association, has come up with the categories of work integrated learning. You'll note that one of the categories is italicized, apprenticeship, because that is the only form of WIL that is not currently occurring at Waterloo. But the rest are occurring they may not be actually called that necessarily, but they are occurring here on this campus. In the black circle, that also includes additional types, field experiences, simulations, and performance-based learning, which are 3 additional types that the ministry has identified as being experiential. And then outside of that, in the white circle, labs, study abroad, and conference presentations, the ministry has decided are not part, well, the previous people who've been talking about this, who I'm assuming are the same people who are currently talking about it, had come up with this way of defining it. So that's why the different circles, okay? You'll also see a circle off to the side, the co-curricular, because what I'm speaking about and have been speaking about is curricular experiential. But of course, there's much meaningful learning that happens in the co-curricular space, of course. And that's in this other circle, which includes all sorts of leadership programs, paraprofessional programs that might be going on the campus, volunteer work that students might be engaged in, right? So that's all valid and fabulous, but it would be in the co-curricular circle. Okay, so hopefully this will help us see that it's a very broad field, a very large menu, but the key ingredients come from that P.E.A.R. So you'll find with all of these, if it's quality work integrated learning or quality experiential learning, you'll find that P.E.A.R is happening actively, no matter what you're calling it. But then how it turns up and how intensive it is and how many hours it is and where it's happening and whether it's paid or not paid, those things can vary, of course, but the key ingredients are there. Okay? Now, the next letter, A, assessment. So when we're thinking about assessing from an institutional perspective, so now I'm not talking necessarily about assessing the actual individual student within each experience, but again, the assessment of these experiences within a program, questions such as who is doing the assessing, what are you assessing, how are you going to do it, when are you going to do it, are all program level or higher level considerations. How do they align with institutional learning goals? How does the data from these experiences feed up into some broader strategic vision that the institution might have for itself or for its students? And how do those pieces connect? And then the other piece is how does it connect to all existing processes such as academic reviews? Are these experiences in the experiential learning courses or activities aligned somehow with academic reviews, or in the case of programs that require accreditation, how is the data from these experiences brought into accreditation requirements? I'm thinking, are there any engineers in the room? So CEAB requirements, for example, and if there are any other accreditations, because there are lots of accreditations for different professional schools, as you well know. Now, quality considerations is another piece that we've been working on in Waterloo. And I'd like to identify Judine Preddy, who's been very involved in this project. And this is something that we thought we would share with you. It's very early stages, but we thought we would share with this group of experts as well to get your feedback on some quality considerations that we think need to be considered when we're assessing programs broadly. So I'm using the term assessing almost synonymously with program evaluation effectively at this stage, okay? All right, so we're calling this our AAA framework. Again, it'll be easy to remember. Okay, so now we're looking at this specifically from the form of work integrated learning or experiences that are engaging the community. So community engaged learning, for example, where there are 5 stakeholders. There's the student, there's the host organization or employer, there's the educator, which are all of us involved in supporting the students throughout these programs. Government has a stake in this, and institutions, so by that I mean the universities, the institution, or the post-secondary higher ed institution. So those are the stakeholders. All of those stakeholders have specific aims or goals. And they're all very different. They can be competing, they can be challenging to articulate, but understanding the aims and the goals for each stakeholder is very important. Then there are actions that occur for each of those goals to enable those goals to come to fruition. So there are specific actions within each. And then those actions are assessed, or there's some kind of achievement as a result of those actions. So those are the 3 levels, 5 stakeholders, 3 levels: aims, actions, achievements. And the AAA part is that we need to be able to articulate the aims, accomplish the actions, and assess the achievements through a continuous improvement process all the time. So that's it very simply in a nutshell. What we're thinking of in terms of quality considerations for any form of experiential or specifically work integrated learning. And we feel that if we have considered the 5 stakeholders, and if we've properly articulated the aims, accomplished the actions, and assessed the achievements, and we do that on a regular basis, then we've probably got our bases covered quite well, and we shouldn't have too many gaps. But again, this is where we'd really appreciate any thoughts you have as you go through this day on what we might be missing in this and what we may also want to be considering. The plan is that Judine and her team are working on a white paper Because underneath all of these, the aims, the actions, and the assessments are, of course, a broad body of literature which supports what are best practices here. What are some of the goals or aims that have been identified through the literature? What are some best practices that have been demonstrated and evidence around actions that work? What are some ways to assess, and how do people do that? And what are some of the continuous improvement processes being used in these programs globally? So the white paper will look at that, and then we hope to be publishing an article later this year, really underpinning this framework with the literature. Yes, hello. Go back one slide, this way. You like that? Is that what you want? Okay, I believe this is also posted on the WACE website, yeah? Okay. Okay. All right. We'll just keep chugging along here. All right. Okay, so fundamentally what that framework, these are the key questions that emerge from that framework. Regardless of the type of experiential, I believe, and regardless of the philosophy or the intention or motivation behind it, is that we should be able to answer these questions. What are the aims of your program for all stakeholders? What actions will you undertake to accomplish your aims? How will you assess your achievements? And what processes will you put in place for continuous improvement? That seems pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, reflection at the institutional level, what does that look like? And to me, reflection is really, for the institutional level, is about impact. What are you trying to accomplish? What is the point? What is the impact you're trying to achieve as a result of these programs? Because we all know, and everyone is in this room because you're highly motivated and interested and have an affinity for these kinds of programs, but anyone who spent any time in these programs know how complicated they are, sometimes very resource intensive, very challenging, because you're engaging with educational processes that happen in a very different way. But here are some examples of impacts and some that you might want to think about. So for students, the stakeholder of students, sometimes those impacts are around employability. There's a little reference there of an article that's been written about employability outcomes as a result of these things. For curricular, some of the impact that you might be looking for is curricular renewal, curricular development. The institutional level, it might be around program planning, recruitment, retention, other things like that. For the host organization, the impact might be around the student as innovator, the student as disruptor, the student as contributor, the student as change agent in some way or not. And for broader society, there might be some collective societal goals that we might be looking at in terms of impact for these programs. Did anyone read the Global and WIL article this morning about the role of how well Canada's doing in terms of developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem? Did anyone see that Global and WIL article today? So of course it was done, the article was written by the head of My Tax and another person, can't remember her name, but basically saying that Canada's coming out very, very well in terms of developing an entrepreneurial ecosystem, which would resonate very well with this institution, I would think. And they identified entrepreneurial programming in coursework and intentional curriculum around entrepreneurship. Also, Accelerate centers, organizations like Velocity, Greenhouse, other places, but also entrepreneurial experiences, entrepreneurial co-op, entrepreneurial work integrated learning is other ways that contribute to an entrepreneurial ecosystem. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm thinking about broader societal goals of what are we trying to accomplish with our experiences and how do they feed a larger agenda. So a large agenda that I like to think about is this one. So the UN Sustainable Development Goals, we're all familiar with these. Waterloo has a center, I can't remember the name of it, where these goals are being assessed. Does anyone know the name of that? Sustainable Development Goals Network or something? It's in the Faculty of Environment. Do you know the name of it? Can you say that loudly? that's it, Sustainable Development Solutions Network. So again, a strong affinity for the positioning that Waterloo is taking in this space because we're hosting that network or supporting it in some way. And we know these are the Sustainable Development Goals that Canada has signed on to, as well as others. You're all familiar with the 17 goals. So, when we think about these, and we come back to our programs and what we're trying to accomplish, right from the get-go, we want enhanced educational experiences. We want students to better understand our curriculum. We want them to develop capabilities and have learning outcomes that align with our program goals as well as our institutional goals. And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could talk about what impact they're also making towards attaining some of these things and where that might make sense for us. And I think all of us can find our way here. I think if you're thinking about you're the CEO from the Royal Bank, you can find yourself there. If you're an organization that's working on gender equity, you can find yourself there. If you're someone who's concerned about clean water in the environment, you can find yourself there, and we can find our way there through these programs with our students. And that's that. Now, I think, do we have time for questions? All right, so, are there any questions? Hello, yes? Okay, thanks, Anne. Yeah, it's a bit hard to hear, really.
I noticed you had that apprenticeships are not covered here at Waterloo. I would say at the grad program level, at least, we treat our students, the graduate students at least, as apprentices to learn from, well, okay, the expert. So I just wanted you to comment a little bit further about what you mean by apprenticeships and why you think it is not covered here.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, actually. So the point you're making is that graduate students are effectively apprentices learning the trade of becoming an academic, right? Which is, I think, very true. When we look at that list of apprenticeships, and maybe we need to redefine it actually, we think about the very traditional apprenticeship as under the how the ministry would view it. So it's a trade. So, chefs, auto mechanics, welders, and there's a very specific term for those programs. But, that's a really interesting thought. I wonder if we could reframe it from the perspective of Waterloo around what an apprenticeship might look like if you're a graduate student, because you're absolutely right. Effectively, that's what's happening, isn't it? Yeah. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, okay.
How about that?
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Norah, for sharing those perspectives. As we look to expand experiential across the curriculum, having those quality frameworks in place will be critical to ensure that the outcomes we're intending for our students, for our partners, will be achieved. So that's a really great model for us to think about as we look at new experiential opportunities.